So, as you can see, our Bayesian afternoon continues. I am Jari Järvi. I'm from Aalto University, and my talk today is about new method for computational structure search, and we apply that to study molecular adsorption. Many of our modern technologies are based on functional materials, such as graphene or hybrid perovskites, for example. The properties of those materials emerge from their atomic structure, and to maximize the functionality, we have to know the structure. These materials are commonly blends of organic and inorganic components, and here we focus on their hybrid interface. For example, in a hybrid solar cell, to optimize the optical adsorption spectrum of the photovoltaic material, we have to know the molecular arrangement in the interface. And this is a complicated task. We can approach it by first looking at the adsorption of a single molecule on a substrate. But even this can be challenging with our current methods. In experiments, it can be difficult to interpret the images obtained with, for example, atomic force microscopy. Then when we turn to simulations, to know the optimal structure of lowest energy, we should basically know the energy of all possible atomic configurations. And with complex hybrid materials, that is simply too expensive computationally. We could try to apply some chemical intuition to estimate the best structures and narrow down the search space. But with complex materials, that is really difficult to apply and can lead to wrong or at least biased results. Therefore, we need new tools. So today I talk about the new method in development called Bayesian optimization structure search, or BOS. BOS accelerates the search of the optimal structure by sampling the potential energy surface intelligently. What this means is that here in this example we have a two-dimensional energy landscape. These are from the alanine conformers, and there we have the rotation angles of some molecule groups. On the left, we see that BOS has predicted this landscape with only 50 evaluations, and that means 50 calculated energy points. Conventionally, to obtain similar kind of surface, here on the right, we would need 400 evaluations, so 20 by 20 energy points. Quite commonly, we are most interested of the most stable structure of the lowest energy. And in this case, BOS predicted correctly the lowest energy point after only 10 evaluations. So that is a big leap in efficiency. Then how is this done? So in this process, BOS builds the most probable surrogate model of the potential energy surface by choosing wisely which energy points to calculate. The model is refined iteratively using active learning and Bayesian optimization. Bayesian optimization is a method to optimize unknown, so-called black box functions. And this is done in two steps. First, based on the currently known data, we use Bayesian regression to fit the data over a distribution of functions. These are the Gaussian processes that we have heard earlier today. Then we use so-called acquisition function to determine which point to evaluate next. In our case, this means that we choose an atomic configuration for the energy calculation. Then, with the obtained energy, we feed it back to the model and do the fit again, and then we iterate this process. Now, this is the expensive part in our case. To calculate the energy accurately, we have to use quantum mechanical methods. Here we use density functional theory code FHI-Ames, and since we study the adsorption of molecules, the dispersion interactions are important, and we implement them with the van der Waals surf corrections to the PBE functional. Then, instead of doing the search in a full chemical space of all atomic configurations, we define a configurational space. Based on our current knowledge of the system, we defined so-called building blocks, which are groups of atoms which we define to be fixed. These can be, for example, rigid molecules, some rigid parts of molecules, or for example, metallic surfaces. And with this, we can reduce the number of search dimensions. For example, we can only look at the height of the molecule in one dimension, or for example, the orientation of a molecule with 3 rotation angles. So this concludes our methodology. To summarize, we use Bayesian optimization to pick specific atomic configurations for energy calculation. Then we feed the energy back to the model, and with iterating this process, we refine our model of the potential energy landscape. Next, I will show you one application of this method. Here we studied the adsorption of a single camphor molecule on a copper 111 surface. This system has been studied experimentally here at the Aalto University at the atomic scale physics group. And here are some of the examples of the atomic force microscopy images that they have observed. So in roughly half of the samples, they observed this kind of pinwheel image. And then here's one example of the other kind of images. And now our aim is to use BOS to study the potential energy landscape and potential energy surface, and try to see if we can find any explanation for these images. First, we started by studying the internal geometry of camphor. Camphor has 3 methyl groups, and with BOS, we did a 3-dimensional search for camphor conformers with these group rotations. And in the results, here's a 2-dimensional slice through a 3D energy landscape. We see that there is one single minimum, and the activation energy for the methyl group rotation is about 0.1 electron volts. And that tells us that in normal temperatures, the methyl groups are not rotating freely. And based on this, we take this found minimum as our fixed geometry and as a building block in our search. Then we introduce the copper layer. So here we use 4 copper layers, in total 219 atoms. And the search for the optimal adsorption site and the orientation is in principle a 6-dimensional problem. We have three translational directions and 3 rotational axes. We approach this in parts here. So first we study the adsorption height in 1 dimension, then the orientation of the molecule in 3D, then the adsorption site in the XY plane of the surface, and finally we proceed to the full 6-dimensional search. First, the adsorption height. Here is the prediction of BOS after 5 calculated energy points. You can see the points here, and the blue line shows the predicted function at that point. And the gray areas are the posterior variance, and they describe the uncertainty of the model at those points. Here, the predicted minimum is at height of 4.18 angstroms measured from the center of the molecule to the surface. And here, BOS is planning to take the next evaluation here at the area of high uncertainty. When we calculate 5 more energy points, we have converged our global minimum to 4.14 angstroms, and also we see that the rest of the energy function is fairly well converged. We then study the orientation of the molecule, so we set the molecule to a fixed location at the height of 5 angstroms to accommodate the rotation. And here we observe that the gamma rotation axis, which is the axis in the direction of the surface, has very minimal effect on the energy. Therefore, in the following, I concentrate on the alpha and beta energy landscapes. First, I will show you the beginning of the search. So here you see the 51st energy evaluations. And here on the left, these are the acquisitions that the BOS is doing. And on the right, you see the current minimum prediction. So you see that the BOS is actually taking acquisitions also from fairly high energies, so it's exploring the potential energy landscape also in the other areas besides the minimum, and that is really needed to solve the potential energy landscape. At this point, you see that the minimum prediction is still changing, even though the energy is fairly constant at this point. And here we observe that after about 165 evaluations, the energy landscape converged. And here we see 2 global minima of roughly equal energies, and in both of those, the molecule is oriented such that the oxygen is pointing down towards the surface. Here are some examples of the local minima. there you see that the orientation of the molecule is very different. It's more like upside down, and the oxygen is further away from the surface. Then we did the search, two-dimensional search for the adsorption site in this found minimum orientation. And here we see that the energy minimum is fairly close to the on-top side of the surface. At the moment, we have the six-dimensional search still in progress, so these results are still very preliminary. But what we have observed is that there seems to be two different types of orientations. Type 2 here is resembles quite a lot what you see earlier in the orientational study, but actually we have obtained an even lower energy in this kind of more like a default orientation looking orientation where the molecule is slightly tilted. In both of these, the adsorption height determined as the height of separation between the lowest part of the molecule and the surface is similar, 2.3 angstroms. And also the adsorption energies of both of these are fairly similar, roughly minus 0.9 electron volts. Now when we return to the AFM measurements, this kind of pinwheel image where we see 6 identical orientations, our result of the low energy in the gamma rotation and the fact that the copper 111 surface has a 6-fold rotational symmetry, that can explain this kind of image where the molecule seems to be changing orientation during the measurement. Here are some examples of the other kind of more static looking orientations, and for these we still hope to finish our study of in 6 dimensions, and after that we will then do some comparisons with the structures. To conclude, BOSS provides us a method for accelerated search for the optimal structure, and importantly, an unbiased method. We have applied it to study the adsorption of camphor on copper, and our prediction of the adsorption height is roughly 4 to 5 angstroms from the surface. In our observed minimum energy orientations, the oxygen atom has been oriented towards the surface, and we have observed 2 different structures in the 6D search. These results help to explain some of the AFM images, and we look forward to finish our 6D search and also do full relaxations of our observed structures. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge our fellow members of the BOSS development team, the Academy of Finland for the project funding, and CSC for the computational resources. And with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Harry, for the beautiful talk. Yes, already one question.
Nice talk. I was wondering, so how are you planning to do this comparison to the AFM data? Is there any direct way of like computing this AFM image from a configuration by making some assumptions, or are you just eyeballing and sort of saying this sort of looks the same?
Yes, thank you. So our first plan is just to sit down with them and discuss our observations once our study is complete. But there are also methods then to simulate the AFM computationally, and also some machine learning methods for those. So,
other questions? One there.
You presented your presentation. You said in the beginning that you have 6 dimensions, but then you presented it in a way that it suggested that you keep X and Y is fixed, and then you study Z. Did you study all dimensions at the same time, or did you study them separately?
Yes, so at this point, this BOSS method is still in development. So we have approached this as kind of gradually, starting from the low dimensional searches, and then checking the hyperparameters of the model, and then when we proceed to higher dimensions, then as a sanity checks to see that if our observations agree with the lower dimensions. And so we also recommend to do this kind of low dimensional searches as to get familiar with the new system. But in principle, there is nothing preventing to go straight to 6D. But But at this point of beta testing, we do this kind of low dimensional tests.
Maybe can I have a maybe I can ask a second question. I guess if you move the molecule around the surface and if you move it in Z direction or if you rotate it, you'd need different measures of similarity. Or I guess you use the coordinates of the molecule as your feature, as a descriptor. So I guess you need different measures of similarity. For instance, if you move it around, it must be periodic. In Z direction, it shouldn't be.
Yes. So so the height is the only coordinate which is non-periodic. In other parts, our unit cell is periodic in all directions, and also the rotations are periodic. 360 degrees, except for the gamma axis, which is 120-degree periodic.
So what kernels do you use?
So for the non-periodic ones, we use radial basis functions.
Okay.
And then the periodic functions for the periodic kernels.
Very interesting. Thank you.
And that, do you use the same length scale on all dimensions? Do you find that the length scale is always the same of the kernel? You know, the hyperparameter?
No, they are very different for different variables.
So that's why you need to set them in this low dimensional search, and then you can run, let's say, the full
well, actually,
you set it,
actually, one of the main features of BOSS is that the hyperparameters are optimized internally in the code. Okay. So the user doesn't need to know anything about those, and those are converged during the search.
Nice. Other question? There's one there.
Thank you. How transferable do you think your code will be to, say, other surfaces, for example, spin polarized surfaces, other molecules that interact very highly with the surface? Will that be a problem?
Well, the main feature of the method is the building block approximation. So basically, any system that can be well reduced in dimensionality to this kind of building blocks, then you can use BOSS with kind of any kind of energy calculation code or any other code that returns just for some variables returns a value. So it doesn't necessarily, here we have applied it to energy, with energy to predict the minimum energy structures, but basically it could be any other feature or value as well. So depends on the system, I would say.
So if there is no other question, we can thank Jari once again.